So it's simply about checking whether you owe them money, okay? And to the extent a company ever insists on getting a Social Security number, which is different than asking. They can ask. Most of us give it just to kind of get the service on. If a company insists on it, let me know, because that's illegal. And there were some, I mean, here's an example. There were some consistently bad practices at the utilities, and the Consumer Division did, in fact, pay attention and fix the problem. Another one I just want to flag, and it's the messiest problem, so I always save it for the end of the training. How many of you have had clients put the bill in a child's name? All right, I'll say now, we'll talk about this more, whenever you can head that off at the pass, please head it off at the pass, because it's one of the thorniest problems to solve. A little easier to solve for the kid who now owes money, or the company says they owe money, much harder to solve for the adult. By the way, feel free to ask questions at any time you like. Okay, so now I'm going to explain the termination rules in Massachusetts, which become particularly relevant at this time of year. I was at a meeting yesterday with the DPU and representatives of most every company in the state, and the rules are tricky around the end of the moratorium. So I'm on the third slide, on the first page. Let's say that the day a bill comes out is day one, which could be today or September 22nd or any other day. Clock starts running on day one when the company sends a bill. And actually, yesterday I heard people talk about first notice. I think of it as it's the bill, but it's the first notice in a sequence of notices you have to get. The second notice that you get can be no earlier than day 27. So it can be later, but the company can't dun you with the second notice until 27 days after the bill goes out. And that is not a termination notice, even though some clients or advocates might read words and say, oh, this is a termination notice. It probably says something like, please note that your bill has been unpaid, and if you don't pay by, they might say 45 days, or actually name the date of the month, you would be subject to termination. That's the second notice. It is not a termination notice. And there are varying views about what this means relative to the moratorium. I'll explain that in a moment. No earlier than day 45, the final notice. This actually is the notice that could lead to a termination. And it usually has red ink on it. It usually says final notice. It almost certainly has the word termination on it. And it probably has words to the effect, if you don't pay this bill, you will be terminated no earlier than 3 days. So it's called a 72-hour notice because 72 hours is 3 days. And let me walk you through, this is very relevant this time of year. I'm going to jump ahead and give you the good news that at the request of my office, the Department of Public Utilities just extended the moratorium to April 15th. By law, it ends on March 15th. And that's a request, but all the companies usually comply. It's not in order, but they comply. At the meeting yesterday, every utility in the room said they already had sent in a letter or they would. What this means, I think this gets very tricky, is, well, the moratorium letter didn't go out saying, please extend the moratorium until last Friday. So there could have been notices that were already cranking out in March, kind of suggesting that you would be terminated on March 22nd. Well, that notice may have been legal when it was sent, but you can't be terminated on March 22nd if the companies agreed to extend it to April 15th. The department's view seemed to be that they couldn't send that second notice until April 16th because you're supposed to kind of freeze the process until the end of the moratorium. People follow me? I mean, you could say, why can't you send out a notice now naming April 16th as the termination date? The department's view seems to be, no, on April 16th, after the moratorium, you could send out that second notice. There's 18 days from 27 to 45. So there's another 18 days, the first week of May, before you could get that final notice, which means no one should be terminated before somewhere like May 10th, I'm going to say, ballpark. None of this is written in stone, folks. I'm telling you this to keep your antenna up. If you're seeing your clients get termination notices before the first week in May, I'd like to hear about it. Because this sequence of, this applies year-round, but this sequence as it applies to the end of the moratorium is tricky. There's an argument. The company could send out a notice on April 10th that we're going to terminate you on April 18th because that's a legal day to terminate. But the department's view seems to be, no, you can send a second notice starting on April 16th. Any questions on that? Because even I get confused by this stuff. Okay. So the notice is a 72-hour notice. Can't terminate. Unlike many other states, you can't be an employee of the company, show up with the final notice, and be terminating at the same time. If that happens, that's illegal in Massachusetts, just so you know. And then there's one other wonderful bit of news you need to know. Well, I mean, good, because people still do get terminated. You can only terminate Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in Massachusetts. Holidays are also out, and so the day before a holiday is kind of like Friday, so you can't terminate the day before a holiday. Okay, so this is a little quiz part of the presentation. It is rare in my experience that clients come running into my office immediately with the piece of paper that's relevant. How many folks does that happen for? Your clients give you what you need to know immediately? Right, you got it. So, but let's assume, might be an elderly client, some of the elderly clients do that. Let's assume you had a client rushes into your office on a Tuesday morning, says, I just got this termination notice in the mail. Today, you've got to drop everything you're doing to stop this termination. Do you need to drop everything you're doing that day? No. Why not? A couple of you said no. Why not? You have what? When do you have until?
Well, that would make them get terminated on Friday, so you'd actually have until Monday?
Yeah, excellent answer. Right, and the reason I go through this is very practical. I, who have been doing this for more years than I care to admit, once had a call from someone on Friday, and actually, usually, when I think someone's really going to be shut off, I drop everything I'm doing and I start calling the company. And finally, I get a lawyer to come. She says, Charlie, it's Friday. They're not going to get terminated today. And the other thing you need to know is, I'd say, in somewhere around 50, 60, 70% of the cases, you really can help that client out, and it would take less time than Tuesday to Monday. So you have enough time. And so you need to know, really think through, when could that person actually be terminated? Now, you also then need to know, as you agreed in the back, your clients don't run in immediately with the right piece of paper. So what do you need to know when that client's walking in? They just show you the notice. What do you need to know about it? You need to know when it was issued. Because I didn't tell you one other thing. So for the first 3 days after the notice, they can't actually terminate you. It's kind of please pay. You got a little window here, last final notice. They're also only good for 14 days. After 14 days, they expire. And this isn't theoretical. It's real. Many, many, many termination notices expire. I will use the example of, I'll use the example of a company in your service territory. I won't name it. They tend to send out 10 times as many termination notices as they have trucks and employees available to do the terminations, which you can either see as a good thing because it means your chances of getting terminated are going down, or it's a bad thing because they're kind of scaring people. It's a reasonable collection tactic. They don't have enough trucks and employees. So a notice can expire. So if you got a notice and you weren't sure when your client got it, this you might want to write down. The safe words are to call the company and say, what is the status of the account? Because I think almost every customer service rep will look at the screen and immediately say, oh, account's up to date, account's behind, it's scheduled for termination. They'll usually tell you that, and so it's useful knowing where in the scheme of things your client really is, given that you don't really know when that notice may have been received by your client. Now, the companies don't have to go back to step one. If they sent out a final notice that expired after 14 days, they can just send out another termination notice. So they don't have to go through the whole sequence again. On day 15, first notice expired, they can send out a second notice. So they're allowed to do that, but they can't shut your client off based on a very old notice. And this gets to one other point that I'm going to mention probably 3 or 4 times during the training, and it's really important to understand. Nancy, at some point, could you figure out how to get that thing up on the top so it doesn't move? So let's assume at most companies, they don't have enough trucks and employees to shut off everybody who gets a shut-off notice. So how do you think they go about prioritizing who gets shut off? Largest bill and most number of months of 0. So it's a combination of how much do you owe us and how bad is your payment history. So if it happened to be the winter and your winter heating bill for a gas company was $600 and you miss it, it's a large amount, but if you've been paying all along, you're going to be relatively low down the list. If you just have a small apartment and your electric bills are only $30 a month, but you might have missed 7, 8, 9, 10 bills in a row, 0, 0, 0, 0, that's going to make you very high on the list. This is a really useful bit of information to get through to your clients.